Welcome to another episode of Inspire People, Impact Lives. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, Managing Partner at Northwestern Mutual. Today on our show, we have a special guest, Tom Wiley, President of Madison Newspapers, Inc. Get that right?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. And publisher of the Wisconsin State Journal, as well as Madison.com. And before we get started, I want to give a quick thank you to you, our audience. We've seen the reviews on iTunes coming in and want to take some time to say thank you to those that are subscribing and listening and leaving a review. It does mean a lot to us. We love the feedback. So keep it coming. Today, Tom will be talking with us about how understanding audience data can transform your marketing strategies. I think that in today's market, everyone understands that data is important, or artificial intelligence, or whatever you want to look at it as, but knowing how to use that data and fully understand the data is a different story. But Tom, before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about your history.
Sure. Well, actually, it's a bit of a homecoming for me. I actually grew up right off of Vilas Park. When I was 10 years old, we moved. Parents were professors at UW, and they became professors at Michigan State, who got thoroughly trounced on Saturday. But the right team won, I will say that. That was the better team. So I'm an MSU grad myself, but lived half my childhood here in Madison and half in East Lansing. And so it's really fun to come back and see the old stomping grounds from when I was a kid. And then, of course, after that, I've been in the media business for 25 years. I've held roles ranging from calling on car dealers as a sales rep all the way to being the executive vice president of sales for the second largest publishing company in the United States, a company called Digital First Media now. The last 10 years, I've been in the publishing business, which is really the business leader of the publishing unit. So people tend to confuse what's an editor and what's a publisher. And a publisher is sort of like the CEO of the organization. They run the division, and then the editors run the newsrooms. And so people confuse that because they read the articles, and that's the most important part, which is great. And fortunately, I have a fantastic editor here in Madison who does a good job for us. And so, but that role, in that 10 years, if you think about when that is, that's 2009 through 19. It's a change agent role. And so much of my career coming out of sales and then moving into management was about, what kind of assets do we have as a company, and how do we leverage those assets for success with our partners? Because we are a marketing organization, and we do sell advertising and we sell circulation and readership. So that's sort of what we've been doing for the past several years. And I had a chance to come back to a company I love and work in a town that I've fallen in love with again. So we're really happy to be here.
So 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
3 kids. How long were you in Madison before your parents moved away?
10 years. So age 1 to 10, basically.
Gotcha.
So I moved to, I'll give away my age here, I moved to East Lansing in 78, and in 79, the Spartans won the national championship with Magic Johnsons and that crew, and we were in that space then. So
that's great. And then you've been in Connecticut the last 10 years, right?
Yeah, basically. The last 10 years I've been in Connecticut. I went out to work for Digital First Media. I had been with Lee Enterprises, which is actually one of the owners of Madison Newspapers before that. And so while I was out there, I ran publishing divisions that basically ranged from Michigan all the way through Massachusetts. So I worked with publishers across that geography for that time.
So it is really cool, the homecoming you go through. So before we get into the meat, I'm just curious, what to you was the biggest change coming back to Madison? And then what in your mind, because you were a child, I grew up in Central Illinois, came up here right before high school. So this has been my home since 8th grade. I'm imagine if I go back to Champaign or Peoria, Illinois, a ton would be changed, especially in Champaign being a college town. So what was the biggest difference, and then what stayed the same for you?
So the biggest difference is just the success that this town has had, this region has had, on capitalizing on what makes it unique. So I spent some time in Ann Arbor, I spent some time in East Lansing, I lived out east in some college towns, including New Haven, where Yale is. And this town has an amazing mix of government, education, and private capital and intellect and skill sets. And in addition to that, you've got the diversity of age and the diversity of cultures that the university brings to the student population. And then you combine that with this concept of, the town is really built around the isthmus, and you literally are layering an amazing diversity of thought and life stage and worldview into this very narrow literal land, mass. And so I think it creates a dynamic of interaction and a dynamic of opportunity here that places like Epic and Exact Sciences and other major companies around here. You look at what's happened with like HealthX. You look at what's happened with Mortgage Institute. Wharf, another example. These things don't exist in other places, and we being Madison now, I get to say we're way ahead of that curve. And there's a dynamic and interesting and healthy vibrance to this community that doesn't exist in a lot of other college towns that you would think Ann Arbor and East Lansing and other. Now people are going to call me and say, "Why are you addition on East Lansing?" But it's true. And then so that's the thing, is that the opportunity, and then that's led to this gigantic boom of infrastructure. So I used to walk from my house on Vilas Avenue to Randall School, and I'd go down Monroe and Regent, and on the corner was Bernie's Rock Shop, and we'd spend our allowance money on geodes down there. And now that's a gigantic condo or housing complex, and that whole area is booming. So, and then I would say the thing that remained the same the most was Bernie's Rock Shop. So one of the very first things I did when I came back to town is I went and found one of the 2 open Bernies and went in, and I got my brother a T-shirt, and he doesn't know this, so hopefully he won't hear this podcast. But for Christmas, I got him a Bernie's Rock Shop T-shirt that says "I got stoned at Bernie's" and a geode. And
that's great.
It's really cool to see that kind of local retail has survived the boom, and now we just did Idea Fest through Cap Times over on campus a couple weeks ago, and one of the main sessions we did was how to not let Madison become Seattle, and we had some amazing people talking on the panel about that, and that's a real concern we have, and we think there's real opportunity in this town to avoid that and take advantage of all this economic growth. So
that's great.
It's cool.
It's a great answer. So I think marketing, we can both agree, has changed a ton over the last 30, 40 years, whatever it might be. Yep. So how would you define the role of today's marketer, if you will?
So I actually think the role of today's marketer is very much the same as it used to be, and had been sort of when the concept of marketing and the concept of media mix and agency work and things like that was invented in the 40s and 50s. But what's really changed is the complexity, the number of distribution channels. I always find it humorous when people talk to me about, well, we're on the internet, or I'm on TV, or I'm in the newspaper, and we're like, okay, where, when, how many, how often, and all this. So we always talk about how the internet is billions of channels, television is thousands of channels, radio is hundreds of channels. And so you really have to get down to something that is measurable and is meaningful as a marketer to be able to compare apples to apples. And we often see that it's sort of put in the too hard pile. And so the sophistication of what a marketer needs to be able to do, just basic statistical math skills have to be a lot better than they used to be. It's a lot less intuitive than it used to be. And yet, to be able to make sense of it is incredibly time consuming and almost an endless process of sifting through an endless number of options. We have some of this problem in retail. I always joke, when I have to go and, get a box of cereal for the family and it's 2 aisles, and you're like, how can there be this many boxes of cereal? But that's what marketing's like now. There's literally millions of options, and it's very difficult to find a common denominator that would allow you to justify investing in one over another. So I think that's the biggest difference from 20, 30 years ago, is instead of 3 or 4 broadcast stations and a couple of print options and outdoor and 3 or 4 radio options, it's literally in the millions now.
Yeah. You hear that, Chad? You gotta be good at math to be good at marketing now. Who would have thought? Your high school and professors at UW didn't teach you that, did they? now you gotta know math.
It's funny because I look back on it, like my favorite courses when I was an undergrad were microeconomics and statistics, and I was a communications major. So
so you weren't a journalism major?
No, I was not. I went to Michigan State and I was in the communications school for advertising. I don't think the journalism school would have let me in. I was not a very good student in high school. I was a very good student in college, but that was because it, relative to working full time, it was relatively easy.
So. Yeah. So I know you don't like this phrase, but in the digital age,
Yeah.
it seems obvious that using data to make marketing decisions is the, quote unquote, smart way to go. But how easy is it to do that?
Well, actually, I think the digital age is an accurate way of describing the age we're in, because what's disintermediating everything is digital. So there are digital options for almost anything you can imagine, and maybe we can talk about it later with something that's going on with some of the niche news, which use lowercase n in the news there.
Yeah.
But I actually think that the distribution side of it, the having evidence as to we did in fact send the email out, or the banner was in front of X number of people that fit your target audience, or the adjacency as promised, or the logo appeared on for the sponsorship. That's really easy, and it's actually it's as easy as it's ever been. It's just instead of a bill from your TV station or a tear sheet from your newspaper that shows when the ads ran by date, you now have a database that drives the actual purchasing process, whether you're doing it yourself through something like Google on the self-serve sort of search functions, or if you're doing it through one of the Facebook self-serve engines. You can see empirically that those things were delivered. But the complexity of that is then what kind of response do you get, and how do you measure the ROI on that? And that's the key, is understanding is we spent X. We spent $1,000 and we got this number of leads, or we sold this number of sofas, or we got this number of engaged users onto our website and a positive brand association, or this many videos were watched for at least a certain time. All those empirical pieces are really easy in the digital space, but I think they can be a bit of a false sense of security when the marketers and the business they're working with don't define the attribution and the end result that's supposed to lever.
Right. Or they don't give us the data. Say, talking from a business owner perspective,
right?
If we don't see that data and we just have loose feelings about did that marketing campaign work or did it not, then we're left to go, well, it didn't work.
Well, actually, I agree with that. And I actually think that the mistake that's often made is that the logic of the choices for distribution channels, whether they're digital or traditional, should be demanded by the business owner. I mean, in your case, it would be really smart to say, I'm trying to solve for X. I need more leads in a particular demo, or I need to see a certain amount of attendance to a seminar, or whatever it is that triggers the benefits in your own space, is to understand, who do we think will respond, and how do we define attribution, and then why did you choose the channels of distribution you did, whether they're social or mobile or targeting around display, or whether they're using traditional media outlets, direct mail, print, television, radio, those kind of things. And so the question is largely, why would you pick those things? And then empirically, what is the math to say, I'm going to invest $1,000 and I'm going to get X amount of penetration to my target audience? The mistake people make is that in digital, because you can make the association directly, you can say, look, I guarantee you those emails only went to people who look just like the customer you want to deliver. Well, if that costs you $1,000 to reach 10 of them, and you could run an ad, say, in the Cap Times or Wisconsin State Journal, or you could do something in, say, the Isthmus, or a television program, some of the traditional media. If you could reach 100 people for the same $1,000, which one's the better buy? And just because there's attribution for one in a direct way in a digital space doesn't mean it's a better buy. And that's something that people have a hard time with, because they don't consider the other end of it. And the only way you can consider the other end is if you demand data sets from those particular channel representatives, because we have TV reps and radio reps and newspaper reps and digital. But if you say, look, I need to know how many of the people that fit my target audience are reading your paper, or are watching that particular primetime show, whatever it might be, you can do the math. It's not that hard, but most people don't share that data. Well, certainly not up front.
So what metrics should marketers be measuring when launching a campaign?
Well, I think at the beginning, using audience data statistics, regardless of the media, is really important. And you have to have the kind of definitions around location or behavior or age, family status, in location, it can be micro location, like had they been in this building. It could be macro location, like within the DMA.
Yeah.
But you have to have those things to start with, and then you have to ask about, how am I reaching that audience, and how does that audience interact with the media channel that I'm communicating to them in, and then what kind of attribution or value of response am I going to get? So if the marketer can't define why they're using a particular media, and then measure the ability to deliver on that KPI in this case, because we're wrong a lot. I mean, we make educated guesses, and the more volume you have, the more data points you have, the better you do. But the process of optimizing the campaign should be a constant piece. And so you really, digital reporting and focusing on measuring the efficiency of the distribution channels and the creative in those response rates. So I'll give you an example. When we run digital campaigns for our clients, we don't only use Madison.com. We also use all of the readily available sources for multimedia advertising across the programmatic databases. So what we do is we run campaigns against target audiences, and we'll run 3 or 4 different campaigns against 3 or 4 different target audiences for someone like you. And then we'll actually come back and report to you that the cost of the campaign was X, the response rate was Y, the attribution was Z. And so we're keeping campaign B and C alive, we're killing campaign A, and we've developed a new campaign that goes after something new. Or we're going to leave it alone, and we're going to kill one of the 3 campaigns. And that optimization process is where the relationship sits. So the marketer should be, in a business setting, the marketing department should be saying to the media providers and the campaign development people, whether they're internal or external, are we getting the response rates we thought from a very well-educated guest in the first place? And if we're not, what do we need to change to do that? Which, ironically, you guys are in the, management of people's financial assets. I mean, imagine if you went to somebody and said, we're going to invest in these 5 things, and then you just left it alone for 7 years. As the bond rates change and the market goes up and down, I mean, you're constantly, right, so you're constantly optimizing their assets around their needs, life stage, right, and financial status, and also the KPIs that you and that client have agreed to. Advertising and marketing should be identical to that.
That's
so
really
our
good
most
analogy.
sophisticated clients and relationships we have are a lot more like retainer than they are price and item, where we solve business problems rather than give you adjacencies.
Oh, that's a really good analogy. One of the things I thought about earlier is you talked about niche. And I don't know if this is right for every industry, but I know we were talking before we started recording about my industry and how going very narrow on your focus about who you're looking for is really important. Is that important for all industries, would you say? Or is there casting a broad net better for some?
Yeah, so it's interesting in some media geek speak, we call that the thin market. And so the concept is, of the population of adults at any given moment, how many people are in the market for that particular service. And so if you're looking for people with at least $1 million liquidity, that's a really, really thin target, right? And you can kind of go from there. People looking for jobs is usually a thin market, especially in Madison with our low unemployment rate. People buying houses is a thin market. People buying cars is a thin market. People buying appliances is a thin market. So if you think about that, at any given moment, if 1% of the market in any given week is in the market for a car, which sounds like a really small number, that would mean that half the market buys a car every year, because there's 52 weeks in a year and 1% rolls over. So the percentage is actually a microscopic subset of 1%.
Yeah.
But groceries or fuel for your car or basic sort of staples of life are very, very what would translate to thick markets. So how many people are in the market for groceries every week? Well, it's more than half the population.
Yeah.
So the targeting becomes a mechanism for deciding the efficiency of the buy, not a means to an end itself. And I think that's a major mistake, that the complexity and the resources and the data available in digital marketing has created this concept that any wasted reach, any reach that isn't hitting exactly my target audience, is a waste, because I'm not communicating to someone who is ready to act at that moment. But that would imply that any advertising happening prior to the ability to create attribution through the digital space was just good guesses from the 1930s through the 1990s. And they weren't. There were some very successful campaigns. And what we're seeing is a mix of broad reach and positional branding advertising that mirrors the message of a micro-targeted call to action is creating a multiplier on the performance of both. And we're hearing the same thing from Unilever. We're hearing the same thing from some other big players like Procter & Gamble, where lo and behold, a media mix of broad reach with healthy frequency combined with hyper-targeting creates better results than just one or the other.
Yeah,
which we
it's
knew,
like diversification.
Which we knew 30 years ago when target marketing was, target marketing was single sheet inserts in the newspaper into a zip code and direct mail. I mean, now we've got target marketing, which is, the 35 demographic behavioral, and they're in Camp Randall on Tuesday, this kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and then you have the digital world. If you Google one thing, it all of a sudden shows up in Instagram, Facebook, and a banner ad.
Or talk about it with Alexa. Or
Exactly. And we'll get to some of that as well. But what I found interesting about what you said there is less about who you missed out on, but what immediately came to mind for me was what was your ROI overall? If you only hit on 1% of those mailers or that broad marketing that you just did, but that doubled or tripled or quadrupled your investment, wouldn't that be worth it?
Well, right, and it's interesting because people ask me all the time. Actually, I was at an AmFam event last night, and for the golf outing, and Steve Stricker came over and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "How are you guys still in business?" Which is like teeing me up for 3 hours of this.
So how long you got? Sit down, Steve.
But it's interesting because I thought about that question in coming into this conversation. And in the news space, this concept that the internet killed newspapers, it's actually the opposite. The internet saved newspapers. The digital distribution channels have gotten most newspapers back to the raw market penetration numbers they were at before the advent of the web. So in the early 80s through the early 90s, most newspapers in this country ran around 80% adult penetration in a given week. And of that 80%, 60 of it was Sunday only. So you could imagine how that math would work. But we lost that. We lost half that audience over the next 30 years. And during that time frame, what did we do? Well, we built digital distribution channels like Madison.com, and then we promoted the hell out of them in the newspaper. Like every single byline was, to see more pictures, to read more, to comment, etc. Go here. And what that's done is we're now back up to that. We're now back up, near that 80% mark. And Madison, the combination of Madison.com and the Wisconsin State Journal and the Cap Times reaches 77% of the adult population every week. We would be at a number hovering somewhere between 50 and 60 without Madison.com.
Yeah.
So the same thing happens for marketing. So what we found is that marketers should not be disintermediating their traditional buys with digital buys. They should be treating it as another set of tools to accomplish the task, but the tools are much, much more surgical than they used to be. So, we're not doing brain surgery with a hammer anymore. We're doing brain surgery with a laser. But that doesn't mean that the baseline can't be built in a way that they complement each other.
Yeah, no,
it's a mistake to think about it. And we see this all the time. Clients all the time that say to me, "Oh, I have a TV budget, I have a newspaper budget, and I have a digital budget." And I'm like, "And what's your audience budget?" I mean, because if you know your audience budget, you could move the audience budget around based on the ability of the media to deliver it. But why do we have a budget for it? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, do you have a bus budget? Do you have a flyers budget? Do you have a business card budget? I mean, what these are all distribution channels. That's all they are. So we hear this all the time. That they have this very traditional sense of I have to have a media mix, which I'm not quite sure what that means anymore. And I have to have a media mix in a way that I assign the budget by channel of distribution, and we don't do anything else like that in our life.
Yeah, well, that's really good, and that's a great reason why we're doing this podcast today. Is hopefully it helps some business owners understand that shouldn't be the case if they happen to fall. And by the way, nothing wrong with you if that's the way it was or how you've set it up. You were just taught differently at that point, and now you know that it should be about what's your audience reach and who are you trying to get after, and working with someone like this group of people at the Madison Newspaper Inc. that actually know what they're doing to help you kind of navigate some of those conversations and thoughts.
Yep.
Because you can't, as a business owner, what you do really well. And you know what you do really well.
Yep.
So it's fact finding. It's helping me, the business owner, understand where are we trying to go and what's the best way to get there.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of analogies for it. We had an organization in our industry for years, and I was part of it back in the day. That we would basically go in and we would do what we called a product puke, where we would go into someone like you and we would just saying, well, I have this and I have this and I have this, and we'd roll out all these neat things on your desk. And you would sift through those and say, I like that one, or I like that one, I like that one, based on your own knowledge and your personal biases. Now we're moving to a prescription model, which says we want to come in and find out what's ailing you, like a physician would. And rather than guessing, does your elbow hurt? Do you have a headache? Do you have a stomach ache? Is it your left foot? Oh, is it your right foot? I mean, I could be here for 3 hours guessing what's wrong. If I just ask you where are your pain points and you tell me, the prescription is a lot easier. Yeah. But the marketers have to know what to prescribe, and that requires data sets, and that's where the complexity comes in.
So let's we talked a little bit about cost to start, or I did at least.
Yeah.
How should we look at cost of a campaign versus value of a campaign?
Well, so in the simplest sense, you need to look at what you're spending in aggregate against the results that you're sort of commanding of the organization. So if in your case, if you're looking for leads that fit a particular profile, you would want to say how many of those leads did we get and what was the cost per lead, and are there other options to get those leads in other ways. So, in a very obvious sense, you just want to look at what's your total investment versus what's the response rate. That requires in advance deciding what the key performance indicator of the campaign is going to be. And that's hard because you have to be able to say something that's broad enough to have a path to success, and something that's narrow enough to justify with whoever's cutting the check.
Yeah.
And so there's a time frame and there's a path to success. And I think whether it's internal or external, the marketing organization should be helping to create the story that says this is why we think this is working and what we think the future ROI should look like. In other cases, the organization needs to decide that there's something else that's more important. Is it number of people attending a grand opening, or is it brand recognition? One of the things we do when we work with branding, which is a lot less technical way, when we work with car dealers, most of them want leads for actual sales and attribution. But when you're working with someone to say, like our own work with the Cap Times Idea Fest, we promoted that for 3 months before the actual event. So how do you measure, other than ticket sales, how do you measure interest in the event? And so what we do is we go to Google Trends and we look at how is the marketplace responding on Google, and is there an uptick in the demand for the phrases like Idea Fest or Cap Times or some combination of those things around the topics, how to keep Madison from becoming Seattle. If we start seeing the things we're promoting climbing the interest of search, then we know that we're having an impact on the interest level in the community. And that's one way we measure our own performance, is how do we see those and that's just one way to look at that, is how do we see the search trends. And you can go into Google Trends and analyze that. It's not that difficult. Is
there a point where you or your team talks a business owner out of thinking about an ROI a certain way? Like if they're looking at an exponential number that you guys know in your heart of hearts is not a realistic target, how are you having those conversations to bring them back to earth?
Well, it helps to be in a position where we work with so many customers. So we often have anecdotes where we can share something that says, look, we were in this position with another client in a similar space, and let me tell you what happened and what the expectations are and what the timeline of that should be. It also helps that we work with an organization centrally called Amplify, which is our digital agency services, and they have thousands of clients nationally. So we can often preload that kind of conversation to say, if we're working with say a local bank, we can go in and say, listen, we've worked with 50 local banks in the last 18 months through the agency, and this is the kind of response rates, this is the kind of sort of traction we saw, and then here's what that led to over time. And then you're framing the success with the client in a way that says, if that's the only way you're going to measure success is around that KPI, then we may not be able to help you. And by the way, we don't think anyone else can either. We've been in that position. We've walked away from business that we don't think we can serve.
Yeah. Because they're only going to end up unhappy if you or your team end up lying to them about a certain KPI or ROI, it's just not going to work.
And we're even to the point now where this sort of delivery of what was promised in as far as sort of media distribution, X number of pages ran or X number of banners ran, or we did indeed send the email out. The whole idea that if they don't get the response rate they need, that's the business's problem and not the media's problem is just crazy. We're content creators. I mean, that's our lifeline, is this the creation of journalism and content. Why can't we help people frame that and help people build engagement?
So when someone says to you the digital seems to be the most obvious way to track ROI, what do you say to that?
It is. I mean, there's no question that there's a direct linear connection, and it's obvious and it's easy. But like everything that's obvious and easy, that's not the only way to do it. And so what we're finding, as I said earlier, is that and this doesn't surprise anybody in the media space, that a combination of how you position your brand and your message to a very large audience creates groundswell, so that when they're in that thin market moment, that they're predisposed to trusting the organization as a source for that and going in and actually seeking that out. So in your business, if you have a very thin market and who you're targeting, we would say to you, well, sustaining a message about who you are and what you do and the value you bring means that when that 0.01% of the market every week becomes available, you're in the mix. And if you're not talking and you're only targeting people who have already self-identified, in many cases, you're way too late to the branding and trust message party. So they've already decided that I know these brands. I've consumed them in ways that I know what they do. In Madison, I would say community engagement, philanthropy makes a big difference. And so when people recognize your name and recognize that you're a part of the community here in Madison, then you're much more likely to get picked from that pool than you are if you're only saying, hey, we saw you did a mortgage search, we've got a great lending rate, and you're like,
so does
the customer's
else.
like, who's that, right? Yeah, right. So it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit too easy to say we're only going to go after people who have recently searched financial services in Madison, and I would say, you're 6 months late to that conversation. That's where tracking ROI is easy, and it's often easy to get the person who signs the checks to sign off on that direct attribution. But the more sophisticated marketers understand that you'll amplify that response rate massively if you've already positioned yourself as a player in the space.
I'm glad you brought up the community piece, because that's where we focused a lot of our marketing, specifically since I took over, is just that's where I love to give back. And B, I feel like we've gained a lot more traction there of just people knowing our name through doing good.
Yeah.
And you may or may not like to hear that, being in marketing business yourself, but that's where I've seen the most traction and most fun, I think, having it in general, just doing good, giving back, and being able to get the name out and word out that way, because our mission and our company values have community as a part of it.
I think that is massively important, and I think the difference, it's interesting. We say, I might not agree with that position. One of the things that
I say, I know you agree with the position. You just may not agree with all my dollars going.
I see. Yeah.
Versus over to you guys.
So it's very interesting. So this is something that actually hadn't thought we'd bring this up on this talk, but our ownership group includes the Cap Times company, which owns half of MNI. And the Cap Times company spins off a significant portion of their profits go to the EVU Foundation. And the EVU Foundation is one of the largest grant donating foundations in the area. I mean, it's incredible. It's $70 million have gone to the community in the last, I think, 50 years or something like that. Or maybe
awesome.
It's 50 million in 70 years. But it's so bad
Either way,
I can't even tell the story because we haven't sort of gone in and said this is an important thing. And so a significant portion of the profits that the company that I run spin off funds the EVU Foundation, which is funding literally hundreds of organizations and literacy. I could go on and on and on. So I've actually been talking with Paul Fanland, who's the publisher of the Cap Times and a friend of mine here in town, about we need to get the word out about what EVU does, and that whole concept is an amazing thing. I mean, what other companies that are, Madison-based companies like Madison Newspapers are spinning off. I don't want to share a specific number, but it's north of 10% of their profits are going directly to the community through grants.
Yeah.
And so we love it, and we just don't talk about it very much in EVU. But when we talk with organizations about that kind of involvement, our messaging from a paid either PR or advertising standpoint, and one, we do articles about those things because we think it's important to support the community in that way. But two, we say to people, I just had this conversation with the AmFam people tonight. I said, 65,000 people come to your golf event. That's an amazingly large event. That's really cool. But what if we told 400,000 people you did it?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to go to the golf event to think the things that they're doing are amazing. And so if you're doing really strong community involvement and only the people that are within that nuclear space know you did it, you're not taking advantage of the way you're spending your money on community involvement, because a company like yours, for example, needs to tell everybody you did it.
Yeah.
And we're proud we did it, and we're proud that our volunteers did it, and we're proud that they're involved in it. And this is the conversation I'm having with my own folks about EVU. I'm like, why aren't we telling everybody we do this?
Yeah.
So
it's fascinating, because I've had this conversation with some of the Northwestern Mutual people in Milwaukee, because we're the largest corporate giver in the state. So you guys in Madison. That's huge. And the immediate company that came to mind was American Family, and they have done a good job of publicizing, whether it's through the Children's Hospital or through some of the golf event. And maybe that's because I'm a golfer as well. That just came to mind. But you guys should be out there promoting that, because whether it was 50 million or 70 million over that 5 to 7 decade, that's a huge number.
Well, and I didn't know anything about this when I took the job. I mean, literally, I had to go do the homework and read up on my own company, and then walk across the hallway and go, what is this? And I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's something, I mean, if you look at the list, most people would be proud of what that is.
Yeah.
And, it's, the Cap Times is a mission-based organization that owns half of Madison Newspapers Incorporated. And so whether you agree with their mission or not, which some people don't, but whether you do or not, that, they are one of the most activist investors in the community through charity with that, and I'm proud to say that's part of our organization. And so we feel like we have this howitzer of communication through the various channels we own, the brands we own here in Madison, and there's several other we own up in central Wisconsin. And we like to get the word out about the things we're doing. We just did a big piece on homelessness in the state last Sunday that I think is a really important piece. So there is a sort of the fourth estate watchdog role that journalism plays that helps me sleep well at night, but it's not the business side of the conversation like we're in the day.
So to that point, kind of tying together what we were just talking about in marketing, what value do you think news and journalism offer to a marketing campaign specifically?
Well, so it's interesting. Every single media, whether it's newspapers or other media, the premier inventory on the web, on television, on radio, and in print is news. So radio drive time is higher demand than any other part of radio. Why? Because it's news. Television, local news, morning and evening, is always the highest demand, and the secondary to that is the evening news from the national feed. Why? Because it's the highest demand, because it's the best demo.
I must be the biggest oddball on the planet, because I don't do either.
You don't. Well, so I won't reveal my own biases, but if you do consume news on internet, television, radio, or print, journalism and news has one key demographic tag to it, regardless of which media you use, and that's your education level. And so the value that journalism and news brings to the marketing that is tangible goes back to the tangible conversation we were having earlier, which is how well do they aggregate a valuable audience? And we're in the news business because we've always been in the news business. What we found out is it aggregates a huge and a really high quality audience. And so we know that education level triggers income, education level triggers nesting status, it triggers home ownership. I mean, all the things you can imagine that education level triggers. And yet education, not age, not income, not gender, not race, not ethnicity, it's education level determines news consumption. And so the value is, if you want to reach a more valuable target audience for most businesses. Now, some businesses are not catering to that high disposable income group, but the thinner the market, by the way, the more education level is impacting it. Houses, cars, jobs, financial services, very thin markets, very high education. So we've found that when we looked into the empirical data sets we have on who consumes our news, the advantage we bring is when I meet with a marketer, I can say to them, well, I can almost guarantee you that when you slice up the audience data, we're going to have a huge chunk for you because we already reach all these people. Yeah. And the other big behavior that we found is undecided voters consume local news at a voracious pace, and so that's be a big thing in the political space.
For sure. So speaking of that, actually, and what President Trump has dubbed as fake news, has that had any impact on journalism as a whole?
Yeah, I mean,
hold on. Let me clarify too. I don't know if I should have attributed that to him or not, but it certainly has been popularized under him. So
yeah, he sort of coined it, right? So I think that a big issue there is that the splintering of media that happened in the 80s with cable and the 90s with satellite and then the 2000s with internet distribution has created a level of tribalism in our country that is because there are more sources of news outlets competing for 100% of the adult audience, right? So they're trying to get their sliver. And what they found, and I think cable in particular has fallen into this trap, what they found is that if they just move away from fact-based aggregation of news and sharing that what really happened as a news story, and then letting the viewer or the reader or the listener come to their own conclusion after they have the facts, and if you watch cable at all, you'll know this is the case, most news programming isn't really news. It's some little factoid that's come up recently, and then 8 people arguing about what it means
and what their opinions are.
And so we've really I think in the cable space, to a lesser extent in broadcast TV, but cable and internet channels have really, and obviously social media have created a real tribalism, which means that whether you are part of believing that what Trump is trying to do is the right thing, or whether you're believing it's not the right thing, it's pretty easy to go find a source that will tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly what you already believe or have an opinion
right.
of. Yeah. So what you just hit on there is the exact reason I don't consume news anymore.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest you get the newspaper.
There you go. So
because we have 50 journalists, and I would suggest you look at Madison.com and a few other sources, because the only journalism that in local and regional that's really left in the country in the markets sort of outside of the top 20 are really from the newspapers, and it's because they're aggregating a healthy audience, they're running a healthy business. The margins are healthy, the business is good. We should be growing. But we're fighting a cultural problem right now. But there is good news, and not good news as in news that will make you happy, but there is journalism happening. And you just nailed exactly what the problem is. The problem is that there's fatigue on the tribalism, and so people just check out because they're just exhausted. And what we say is, but we're still doing that, and we're still tackling the big issues. And it is a little bit disheartening because all these data points we've been talking about we use for our own customers' consumption of Madison.com, and it is a little bit disheartening when what time the Northwestern Wisconsin game is on gets more views than a long form piece on the homelessness problem in the state. But I would suggest not consuming news because you're fatigued with the tribalism is like not voting because you think all politicians are corrupt.
Just most.
Well, I might agree with you that they are, but I would also say not voting just takes you out of.
I totally get your point. I was just being sarcastic, but yeah. So, what key metrics should a news or journalism source be presenting to an organization? I think we covered this a little bit, but I want to make sure that
real brief. I think it's the ability for that organization, whether it's a news organization. I don't think it matters within news. The thesis is this: we wouldn't be in the news business if we didn't think that aggregated an incredibly valuable audience, which gave me a competitive advantage in the marketplace, right? But it's very expensive. but we think it gives us a unique position in the marketplace that allows us to have a better chance at overlapping with that thin market that you want to reach, and it gives us a better chance of building your brand. So what I think you would start with is, what is your ability, if you're talking to a news organization, what sources do you use to measure the audience that consumes your product? How often do they do it? And how well does it overlap with who I want to talk to?
That's good.
I mean, that and I don't think that's just news. I mean, that's everything.
Yeah.
That's any distribution channel you're going to use. And in this case, I would suggest you should be saying, I'm not going to write you a check until you can empirically define those things for me.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
Right. So, if my reps can't do it, please call me. But but it's hard. I mean, and we spend a lot of money on the empirical sort of studies that we do to make sure we know what we're doing.
So that's a really good point. So how do you believe that AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning will affect journalism or marketing going forward?
So
because I know it already has,
right?
Somewhat.
So that's actually a really cool question. I was actually in a meeting at the Lee offices about 7 months ago where we met with the Watson folks. So we were actually discussing specifically how does AI. So two things. One is we're using AI on the optimization side of the campaign. So once we get a campaign running with us on the advertising side, we're looking at what kind of decisions humans are making to make that digital campaign work better for the client over time. So how do we constantly improve? I talked about the ABC comparisons of creative and distribution. Well, we're looking at how humans do that, and can we get Watson to learn how to do that, and then I can speed that process up, and I can lower my cost. That's one area. The second is in the actual creation of news and publishing. The aggregation of stats and the aggregation of sort of enough information to publish a brief on something is getting to the point where you can automate that. And so I look at that and think, well, how could I reapply my resources in my newsroom around the ability to spend more time on analysis and the framing of what something means instead of the aggregation of the batting average or the points scored or how many people voted on a particular election. So you can use AI as long as you have those data sets. You can use AI to predict and aggregate and create readable material, but it'd be a lot better to have that being done by AI than having a person doing, than have the person go out and do a feature on why. Back to talking with Stricker the other night, I said, we'd like to do more pieces on what he and his organization and golf and the Ryder Cup are meaning for Wisconsin and the community and how he sees that, and then let the stats and the score and all that get aggregated and published through another model so that the human side of it gets reported and framed.
Yeah.
I hope that's the case.
Yeah. And and how does it impact the business overall in Wisconsin going forward? I can tell you, because we looked into it, because we were a part of the PGA Championship when it was up there, and we did a cabana or suite or whatever it might be. Ryder Cup was 4 times as much to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So,
and I would suggest that you should take that cost and divide it by the target audience, and then decide, what kind of retention value it brings. And try to put some metrics around those kind of things. I mean, we do those things. We entertain it at University of Wisconsin games. We're a big sponsor at Forward Madison for the flock. And we have a big Madison.com is a big sponsor there, and if I divide that expenditure by the 4,500 people that go to every game, I might not have a metric that lines up with my ability to do something else. But there are intangibles that you put in there to say, okay, this is a multiplier on that value, and so we're a big proponent of that. Again, I'd like to think we're supporting the soccer team in Madison, and then I'd like to tell all my readers we did it.
Yeah,
right.
That's good.
Not just the 4,500 people that are there. But,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Or give them a ticket, or we did a really cool promotion once where they were looking to move some tickets for a game that got added, and we did a thing from Madison.com where we said, you get a free beer with a ticket kind of thing, and it was more of a partnership than it was, and we got a pretty good response rate out of that. So when you do something like that, you can have fun. That
is. So I know we're running out of time. I want to get to our couple, the word game and favorite books and stuff of that nature. I did want to take an opportunity to tell you, because I didn't think about this when you were coming into today, but as you were sitting there talking, I was like, I feel like I should tell you that my first job was a newspaper delivery boy. I worked 363 days a year. I had Christmas morning and New Year's morning off. And that was when I was 11, 12
Slacker.
years old. Right, exactly. So getting up at 5:30 in the morning when I was 11, 12 years old, that was down in Central Illinois before we moved up here. But I credit that to a lot of the work ethic that I have today.
You would, well, maybe you wouldn't because you have, but the number of people that have told me that story in the C-suite, there's a lot of them. And I think, even the concepts of, efficiencies and, you probably had those little tear cards where you had the little cardboard thing that you ripped off and told people how many weeks they had paid for, and you had to keep track of your collections and all that. And you do that at 11 years old. That's a pretty cool
I had
thing.
a radio flyer wagon for Sunday deliveries because the papers were so dang heavy. But for every other day, it was just, throw the bag over your shoulder and go.
Yep.
And it was just in the neighborhood that we lived in down there, and it worked out well. And made good money. I was able to buy my own stuff. I learned the value of saving money, spending money, all that different stuff.
Yep. Even cash flow is taught in that space because of the way you collect and the way you pay and how that was done. And so
it was good
to hear.
But it was something I hadn't thought about in a long time. And as you were coming in today and we were talking about papers, I was like, oh, yeah, it was just a good reminder.
Yep.
Some days not favorable. I don't think I ever really enjoyed getting up at that time.
It's just the paycheck, right?
But it was the paycheck. That's right. That's right.
Who has their first job? They're thinking, boy, this is the best thing I ever did.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's many people. So that's good. All right, let's do our word game.
All right.
So again, as a reminder, I say a word, you give me one back, and you can't repeat yourself.
Just one.
Well, you could do a short phrase too.
All right.
All right. So Madison.
Opportunity.
Journalism.
Democracy.
Duty.
Truth.
Trust.
Foundational.
It's good. Technology.
Inspiring.
Hear that, Chad? It's inspiring for technology. I like it. Data.
Partnerships.
Education.
Power.
Media.
Complex.
Inspire.
Leadership.
Impact.
Consequence.
Good. Those are some good words. I like it, Tom. And they're thoughtful. It made me think as I was saying it, so I went through slower. So, all right, so I always ask this, favorite book either currently or of all time or something you most recently read?
Well, so I'll give two. One, I would suggest everyone read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Great book.
It is a if you understand those concepts, and it's funny because that's another book that is another thought process that is largely sort of philosophically aligned with math. And,
a lot of data in that book.
A lot of data in the book, and a lot of talk about what it takes. So sort of feeding back to your 11-year-old doing a route 363 days a year. There's a lot of talk about that, and I also think just to another piece I took away from that was people I think when you read that book need to evaluate. What are you willing to sacrifice for the end game of what you define as success? Because the most successful people are myopic and obsessively compulsive, which means they get the repetitions. And I'm not sure that's always worth it, but it at least gives you a path to knowing what you're competing with.
Yeah. What always reminds me of in that 10,000 hour rule that he introduced there. And I don't even know if he introduced that rule, but he talked about it heavily in that book. Was the Beatles and all the gigs they played before they went big.
Yep.
So that was great.
And my other book, if you're a media geek like me, read The Attention Merchants. It talks about the evolution of media from very early days in the United States through modern times and what that competitive landscape meant towards the content creation. It's a fascinating book.
Cool. Put that on the list as well. So how can our audience get in touch with you if they choose to?
Well, it's published every day in print and online, so it's twiley@madison.com.
Perfect. Well, really enjoyed our conversation today, Tom. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks
I know the audience will get a lot out of this on the marketing side or just on the knowledge of the newspaper side, knowing that you guys aren't extinct and in fact thriving, unlike Steve Stricker's question. Right. So that's good.
Which one goes out first, golf or newspapers?
That's right. There you go. That's a good. There you go. Did you toss that back at him?
I wish I had, but
thought of it afterwards. All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in today. We'll talk to you soon.